Thank you, Chris. And yeah, thank you for inviting me to do this. I've been a long time fan of this format. I've watched a lot of your workshops, and it's really a pleasure to be here. And as you said, we're going to go through a presentation, I think around 35, 40 minutes. And then I would love to have some time to do a Q&A, and hopefully you'll find it exciting. But before I talk about the project itself, I wanted to just introduce myself. I am Kay. I work as ECD at Superside, and I'm based in Berlin right now. I've been here for 10 years, but I was born in Belgrade, Serbia, and lived there my whole childhood. And then at 18, went to live in Venice, Italy, where I studied design. That was kind of my first international experience. Now I think I've lived more abroad than not at this point, but I always found it interesting to have this sort of three completely different experiences that shaped me as a creative and as a designer. I think what was really funny to me is to think when I think about these cities, they're really sort of gray and not extremely colorful and positive. And then the kind of work I do actually is quite colorful. I always kind of love to have this juxtaposition of the sort of thing I do. I'm a designer. I used to do graffiti when I was a teenager. I went on to do illustration and learn about Illustrator and Photoshop, and always tried to both have let's say a more of like a professional role in branding and design, and but at the same time still manage to do a lot of different things creatively, whether that's illustrations for my friends and their like music activities, or I do a lot of painting, I tough drugs, I do a lot of different things. And my experience, as I said, has always been mostly in branding. So either from agency side. When I used to live in Italy, I did a lot of branding for different type of clients, from fashion to editorial. And then when I moved to Berlin, which is like the tech hub of Europe, I started working in-house as a creative director in a tech company, where it's suddenly I had to shift kind of my mindset from design and layout to KPIs and performance marketing and all these sort of things. And I think that gave me quite an interesting idea on like how the new world of marketing and design is shaping up to be. I think definitely if I think about 10 years ago, working in-house wasn't even a thing you would think about. I remember I got this job at a delivery company, right, as a creative director, but everybody thought like I'm going to be doing deliveries because there's just no perception that you could have a creative team in-house. And so a lot of the stuff that I'm going to be talking about today is shaped by this sort of idea that maybe there is a different way to think about creative, and there are different ways to think about agencies as well. And then when we talk about super side, you probably like, what is super side? It sounds cool, but what is it? We are a creative company. We like to say we're not an agency, we're not a network of freelancers. We are a creative company that's built to be an extension of in-house creative teams. It's been around for 10 years now, but I've worked at Superside for 3.5, and it's definitely changed since I joined as well. So we have around 700 people right now, so quite big, and we're based everywhere in the world. So we were completely remote, completely distributed. I think it's around 80 different locations, from like Cape Town to Kuala Lumpur to Bogota, Colombia, right? Like everywhere in the world. And I think if you would think like a 700 people agency in 80 countries, that would be like a massive network. But for us, we are just completely remote and completely flexible, and work with a lot of really big clients. Our sort of main niches, tech companies, like you see here, like Salesforce, Reddit, Masterclass, Meta, Shopify, all these big tech brands that have massive creative teams already, and they just need more support. So when I joined, this was sort of our creative, there was a brand, that was our look. We were sort of typically like, we would look like a SaaS tech company, right? And I think also how the company was built before, it was sort of this helpful tool for creative teams for in like tech companies. I think the idea before I joined was like, let's kind of just build like a SaaS company for companies. But because of our growth and because we started working with these big brands, we started realizing like this is actually not really reflective of what we do. We do like campaigns for masterclass and we do, like all the illustration and motion that goes into Meta. Like we do so many big things and this is really doesn't look really what we want. And so a year ago, we decided to rebrand. There was actually, you were mentioning this, Chris, like it's interesting to think about agencies rebranding themselves. And there was a moment in time a year ago where we were even considering like, do we get someone else to rebrand us? Because is this going to be too hard? And we were saying, I was saying this to Chris when we were planning this session. I think it's rebranding a creative company is literally like doing your own portfolio. It's too close, it's too personal, it's too much at stake, it's really hard. And a lot of the stuff that I'm going to be showing is going to reflect that it's not really easy. But at the same time, we were saying, how can we though get someone else to do it? Like it's going to be such a cool thing, and we'll be so proud to do it ourselves. We have the tools, we have the potential, and we want to do it, and we want to risk it and try to do it ourselves. So the whole story today is going to be about how we transitioned in the last year from this, like I said, like really tech SaaS brands with like a lot of illustration that looked a bit more generic to a more modern way of seeing creative companies. So it wasn't even just a design change. It's really like a repositioning and a real change in mindset. And the final result is very, very different from where we started a year ago. We were really happy to, first of all, be able to see the change and like business impact in the last 6 months, even. It's dramatic, and I can talk about this in a while. We also were really happy to win a bronze award at the Drum Awards a month ago for this project, which for a company like ours is really cool. I know that maybe there are some bigger agencies that have millions of different awards in their arsenal, which is great, but I think there is something interesting to be at this like first stages of a company and an agency to kind of start seeing these results now, and then maybe when we are 30, 50 years old, we are going to also have loads of those as well. So I will talk about 5 different points and then like how we went through the project from research to strategy, the creative direction, our visual identity, and then how we're thinking about it right now and how we're rolling it out. Because I think what is interesting when you're a creative company rebranding, usually in my past, when I would rebrand a company, you would kind of hand over the PDF or whatever, and then you kind of step away, you go onto another project, and they have to work it out, right? And I think a lot of times it's like reality is not really the same as what we imagined. And you see kind of the brand change in a way that you maybe don't like or you don't understand because it's different when you have to be there on the ground. So actually really interesting for the first time in my life to have seen like the process, but now also see the result and how we're developing it. So research, promise not going to go too much into detail here, although it was months in the making. But we definitely said we want to start with research first. I definitely never recommend going into any sort of project without research. Well, when we talk about brands. And we spoke to 200 different people. It was actually really interesting for me coming from more of a B2C background to actually have to do brand research on the B2B side. So we had to interview creative directors and CMOs and business people in kind of big companies, right? And we learned a lot of things that we actually didn't necessarily think before. So one interesting learning was that brands are growing their in-house teams more and more. I know we all know like 10 years ago, 20 years ago, agencies were the central point, and in-house teams were small, and in-house teams will work with different agencies. And what we've seen in the last 10 years is the kind of creative power is moving in-house. I'm sure you've seen this on kind of in your own experience as well. I know I have a lot of friends who were in creative agencies for years and now are moving in-house, and this is a trend we see more and more. On the other hand, what we've seen and is really funny is like no matter how many people they have, they still feel that they're under pressure. So there's this the biggest pain point they have is just the amount of work. there's just more and more coming. And I think this is due to marketing becoming just more of a volume game, AI, like a lot of things just making us um, busier, right? And I think that has been really interesting for us to think like, okay, so it's not all about like building the biggest agency out there. It's actually in-house teams want to stay in-house. They just need more hands. Another thing that was really interesting was people feel like there is this dance between the fear of the unknown and the excitement of possibility. Again, it's a lot of this goes around AI, but it's not just AI. I think there's just so much to learn all the time. And I think people feel that it's like if you're in an agency, you're not even exposed enough to that sort of technology, and you don't know enough to be able to stay behind everything that's happening. So, um, 80%, you can see here, 80% of people said executives think that innovation is top priority, but at the same time, people feel that they're not satisfied with the innovation performance, right? So they're like, we want to know about this, like AI, whatever, but we actually don't have the resources. I actually was at a roundtable last week in London when we talked to a lot of different creative executives from really big companies. Very interestingly, they really want to, for example, implement AI more in their day to day, but they're not able to because of legal reasons, compliance, capacity. Like, you were just like, how do you figure it out? How do you figure it out? Like, it's not enough to just watch a tutorial. So that was also very interesting for us. So we said, okay, we know that we are the kind of company that also talks a lot about AI and uses it in our day to day, and not just as like a creative tool, but more as like a workflow. But at the same time, a lot of people are afraid of it. And I think a lot of times when we talk about creative, it's almost kind of at odds with AI. Like a lot of people are not fans of it. A lot of people are. There's just this idea that the more AI there is, the more difficult it is to do our job. We were quite interested in this quote we found in a report that said if everybody uses AI in the same way at the same stage in the creative process, it's likely we'll all get the same outcome. So you probably heard this a lot. Like creativity now, strategy, and ideas are going to be even more important in the age of AI, not less. Because if everybody can make anything, it's up to us to create something different. And at the same time, a lot of our like more tech savvy partners and customers are really excited about the possibility of AI. So I think it was end of last year, I was hosting this webinar with really cool design ops manager who was at Zapier before. Now she's at Microsoft, and she was saying I'm really excited about the possibility more than the restrictions of AI because, first of all, we have lower floor and ease of access. Like more people will be able to access creative tools. Nowadays, like we know that even just Adobe CC is quite expensive and it's not for everybody. A lot of tools are getting more and more expensive. On the other hand, what is possible is just almost infinite, right? Like now we have this way of basically creating anything we want. So actually, the kind of space we occupy with creative and design is much wider, which is, I think, really exciting. So if you think about it, it's actually really interesting how this contrast is real and how we talk about it every day. And so we said, okay, how do we create a brand in an AI first creative company in 2025 and for the future when everybody is kind of thinking of AI as this sort of negative force and we know why, right? Like we've all been there. So we did a lot of desk research. We looked into competition as well. We looked into what are some creative companies doing, what are agencies doing, creative studios, more like tech companies. We looked into SaaS companies, even just like a Figma, Canva, Adobe again, right? And what we saw was really interesting, especially in the agency space, is a lot of it is just so self-centered and self-focused. Like we were laughing about the fact that every time you would go to the web, like the homepage of an agency, it would say something like at the intersection of transformation and we're changing the world and we're making everything completely different. And it was like, okay, but first of all, it's not necessarily even true. Second of all, it's like I don't think customers really want you to change everything about their company. I think they just want help. And we were even joking at one point, we were saying, if you ask ChatGPT to write you like an agency style tagline, not only was it really good at it, but it was also, I bet that like you've seen all of these before, right? Like transformative branding and, world class and this and that. And we were like, okay, this just doesn't sound like from the research we were seeing and how much companies want to just invest in house. This is not really what they want to hear. And we said from the beginning, our North Star was like, this brand shouldn't really be about us. It should be about our customers and about the people we work with. And so we go into the strategy part. So that was, like I said, we know about in-house creative teams. We know about us not being in the center of attention. Like, how do we manage to position ourselves in this space? So first thing we know is that behind every brand, there is a great in-house creative team. Like I said, right? Like the top creative companies are actually in-house. I remember there was this, probably you remember as well, Chris, this list from Working Not Working, like 50 top companies that creatives want to work in. And they would release this list. They would interview a lot of creatives that do research, and then you could see the top companies that people want to work with. And I actually looked it up, and 10 years ago, a lot of these were agencies, like top agencies from like Droga 5 to Ogilvy and Pentagram, etc. And nowadays, it's much more tech companies like a Disney and Meta. Well, Disney's not a tech company, but sort of is as well. Right, like Nike, like a lot of company people want to work in-house right now. And this is really interesting to me. And I think, like we said, the best creative directors in the world work in-house nowadays. But their problem is, how do you do really great work when you're constantly in survival mode? This is something we saw. It's not about not knowing what to do, is not having the time or the resource to do it, which we found really interesting. And so we said we want to help in-house teams be more creative. It's not us that are in the center of attention, it's them. And this is where we came up with this tagline, your creative team's creative team, which we really liked because it was such a simple way of explaining what our positioning would be, this extension of the in-house team. We are, like your designer's designer, your copywriter's copywriter, someone you really trust that maybe not everybody knows, but the right people would be like, oh yeah, that's, like the, actors, Meryl Streep, someone who really the best people would go to for help. And then from there, we said we want to have four guiding principles for everything we do. As this is a really good way to just have a clear, almost like agreement between us and leadership. Like how do we actually know we're on the right track? So we said we want to be clever, but not too cryptic. Because again, we saw this in our research. A lot of brands, a lot of agencies are like, oh my God, we're, solving everything and we're too smart for you and you don't know anything, but you come to us and we'll kind of solve your problem. We don't want to be. We want to be fun and clever and a bit tongue in cheek, but we don't want to be not accessible to everyone. And if you remember, like we are in 80 different countries. Most of our teams are not native speakers. A lot of our customers are also not native speakers. It's not about being too complicated and um, too aspirational. Your audience knows their stuff. So another thing we were like saying, our customers, our audience are some of the smartest, most talented marketing creative leaders out there. They know everything. Like there's nothing we can do, not like an ad that we can invent that I haven't thought about. So we actually want to meet them where they are. And so it's really important for us to not forget that they know more than us. I mentioned this before, but it's all like, don't make it about us. So when we talk about anything, we are never self-promoting. We are talking about the successes of our customers. Our favorite projects are the projects for our customers, and our favorite successes are theirs, right? So it's all about that. And then last but definitely not least, never ever ever be boring. So we were saying with our team, we found this quote that said, "We don't have enough budget to be boring," and this really resonated with us. When you're a smaller, like challenger agency, when you're a smaller brand in general, nowadays, especially every single piece you produce and you put out there needs to be a bit interesting. Like if it's not interesting, just don't run it. So, having said that, then we were like, okay, this is all cool. How do we visualize this? How do we position your creative team into a new brand that will have a look and feel that's much more elevated than when we were before? And I'm going to show you three different directions. I think what as a lot of branding studios, we were thinking like, let's just go really wide. Let's go into three different directions visually and see kind of what sticks, what our teams will like. A lot of times in the past, it happened to me that they start picking things apart and kind of Frankensteining the whole thing. We were really lucky that they really gravitated towards one, and you will see which one. But I think it's a really cool way to start thinking about different ideas. So the first one was all around AI generation. So we were saying, okay, um, we are probably like a leader in the space, the AI space. So we want to see like if we would talk about that a bit more, how would that look like? Like what would be this tech-powered new kind of creative company? And so we started thinking all about this limitless creative, being limitless. What does it mean? You remember I was showing this sort of plateau of the design today versus design tomorrow, how now there's so much more opportunity to do anything you want. So we were seeing these different imaginary spaces, like what could creative look like? And so we also started showing our client, which was basically our leadership team, like what this would look like. We wanted to stay in this like shades of green, but also have really modern typography and play around with different AI illustrations, 3D spaces, things like that. Also, what was really cool, a cool test for us is we said if we, for every direction we do, let's do like a fake newspaper article. How would press talk about us if this was the direction? This was just an idea like you're doing AI wrong. LinkedIn told us AI would make things easier, but the opposite is true. So you can see here, it's all about positioning ourselves as the leader in AI creative. And so these were just some examples of visuals that we put together. So it was kind of all very simple, but the language was all about AI as well. We like this sort of twist between like, using tongue-in-cheek language, like our partnerships grow naturally. So it's not all about AI, it's also about the human part, anything humanly possible and more. To talk about this like idea of being limitless. And it was a really interesting way to kind of just talk a bit more about what is our differentiation, which is maybe being more tech forward than other companies. The second direction, we call this the flexible company. So what was interesting here is we wanted to position as a flexible creative solution, seamlessly built to adapt to your needs. And you will remember I was talking a lot about this idea of us not being in the center of attention, but being flexible and adapting to whatever the customer wants. So then we said, okay, maybe we should just make it really minimal. So our branding shouldn't be super like in your face, but it should all be about the customer. So we want to just focus on the customer. Imagine if you had this almost like white label brand where it's all about the brand. And if it's Vimeo, will be blue. If it's Airbnb, will be pink, right? Like we will change with the customer as well. So here we said, okay, we want to be a bit more editorial in a way. It's like a magazine at this point, right? So you could actually put anything you want and it works as a cohesive space. Here we were saying we're unpacking the industry, shaking rise of in-house advertising. As Don Draper turned in his grave, one creative company welcomes it, Superside. So it's all about like this idea, like it's not all about agencies anymore. Now we're going in-house and we're embracing this. And this is, you can see here, an idea of how we would actually strip away our own brand, but focus only on our customers. We would be a bit more playful with the layout and the typography, but it's all about this um, focus on the people, focus on the customer. And as I was saying before, we would almost change color depending on what the brand would be. But if we're showing other projects, you can see here, for example, the tagline, no awards, just work, like just really focusing on the work. And the third idea was all about this sort of like X factor of Superside. We were saying there is something magical about the fact that there are 700 people working in 80 different countries, doing designs for 500 customers every day. It's kind of like you don't see it, but it's happening. And there's something about this idea of magic and supersiding things. So we said, look, let's just think about every time we work on anything, we're just supersiding it. That's kind of almost like verbiage. And so here it was all a bit more surreal, making things larger than life, really playful imagery, really playful fonts, a lot of different colors, a bit more of a bold feel. And here it's also about making it really clear that the world has changed and advertising is left behind. So, like introducing the breath of fresh air. An entire industry has been waiting for a Superside. So, like, what is this magic of Superside? What is it that we are doing differently? And again, it was like a really fun exploration of how it would look like if we were a bit more bold, a bit more interesting, really playful, really fun, and kind of young looking. And so we said, in order to win, and again, this was like weeks of kind of going a bit back and forth and understanding what we like. But we said, if we're going to succeed and where we find our opportunity is this mix of being really consistent, but also dynamic. We really need to be adaptable because that's our brand, right? Like I was saying in the beginning, it's all about adapting to the need of the customer. It's not about us. And then we realized we actually all were quite a big fan of this flexibility route that I showed the second one because it was so easy. On one hand, it wasn't talking too much about us, but it was such a good platform for everything else that we want to add there. So almost again, like you could put any brand and it would work. And so this was maybe like 3, 4 weeks of work, kind of going back and forth and realizing what we want to do. And very quickly we went to refining the actual final visual identity. So this is where we started just tweaking the fonts, the colors, the logo, etc., just figuring out how does it work inside of that first direction. And then you will see that actually what we came up with in the end and what is live now is actually quite close to that original direction, the flexible direction we pitched. So it's this very kind of elegant mix of color and typography and just focus on the work. When it comes to typography, we knew that we kind of wanted to have some specific guidelines to help our search because I think my experience has always been, especially when you work with like tech founders, speaking about details of typography and showing them that like there are so many options is not really helpful. It's almost overwhelming. I find this is a problem with like both typography and color. People have this perception that like there is millions of them, which is not untrue. And so feeling like you have to make a choice is kind of overwhelming. So I always feel like it's good to have a bit of like a guideline as to what is the vision. So we said we want to be able to have both sans and serif to play around with different aspects of the brand. We have to produce so much different stuff. So we want to be flexible there. We want it to be very bold in the typography, as you saw before. We don't really have a lot of stuff to play with. So we were like, okay, let's at least the typography should be pretty strong. We wanted to use Google fonts mostly because most of our day-to-day is on like Google Slides. We do a lot of decks, we do a lot of stuff that you cannot really have designers for. So we were like, okay, I don't want to end up having like a really cool font on our website or the social media, and then most of our like sales decks look completely different. Ideally not super overused, but that's almost impossible nowadays. And then we also wanted to make sure we have multiple variants to play with. One of my favorite things that has happened in design and advertising ever is sort of like these 90s Apple ads. I think it's also maybe like me being nostalgic and being of that age. But I always felt like this idea of the first computer that was a bit different at the time, this kind of really punchy copywriting, this beautiful condensed serif fonts just always stuck with me. And I felt like there's some parallel between AI now and kind of this new technology of AI versus how we saw Mac back in the 90s. So This was basically one of the guiding lights for how we chose our typography as well. And then we combine it with this intertide font that is just a twist on inter, like this sort of condensed look and feel. We also played around with this grids that you saw before. So we just have different ways of using the grids. So whether that's like an expanded carousel, the sort of playful grid or expanded grid, we're just able to use it in different ways for different layouts. And we also said, because we're talking a lot about technology and AI and all that, we want to keep the color palette on the other hand a bit more neutral. So then we lay it into these like greens and pastels and natural colors. So this is sort of color palette we're working with. It's quite fun as well, and it has this touch of the green that we had in our previous branding, but it definitely looks much more natural. And so these are the sort of things we have right now, right? So we have the sort of main color, which is green, that we use for out of home or website or these different things. But then we're also able to use the different colors to adapt to different brands. And what about the logo? So we actually spent a couple of weeks thinking about the logo. Like, do we change it completely? Our designers worked on a lot of different things. Like, we were like, okay, let's try everything. Let's see where it goes. In the end, we thought that actually, because we changed everything else, not to say that our logo is like super famous and it has some brand equity, it maybe doesn't, but we are like, okay, let's kind of keep that and just rework it. It's actually really fun. And we just wanted to kind of make it a bit more modern and fit the typography that we chose. And so this is kind of the different upgraded fonts. I always find it funny. We were lucky enough to be reviewed on the brand new blog. And I like this quote that said, the main hook into this project is the logo evolution, not because it's the greatest or most revolutionary, but it was the most definitely needed, and the result is sufficiently satisfying. And I think this is what you can want from like a logo refresh to be sufficiently satisfying. And it's a nice alliteration. And this is basically the end result, right? So we ended up having this really cool palette of color. We tried to make the art direction, the colors really natural, and then always have this pop of the spark lime green in everything we do. So it really stands out. And I definitely think what we achieved here is to reposition ourselves into a bit more of like an adult company, less of a SaaS tech company, but more of a partner for creative teams out there. But what I like is that we're also still able to be really playful with everything we do. So last but not least, I wanted to show a bit of the role, or like how do we use the brand now? Like once you've finished with the rebrand, I think a lot of times, I said this at the beginning, like a lot of times you're thinking, well, now it's all done. Now we just make the guidelines and then we just do stuff following the guidelines. But that's actually not really easy. First of all, I think the biggest challenge is like you can't think of all of the different applications in the moment of making the guidelines because things have not happened yet and it's really hard to predict the future. So you will have to kind of keep working on the guidelines. Secondly, things sometimes just didn't perform well. Like the things that we in our minds imagined would work didn't necessarily, and we had to adapt. And also, again, like I think it's nice to be able to evolve from what you did. I mean, ultimately, this rebrand in total was maybe 9 months, but maybe the design part was 3 months, and we were not able to kind of imagine everything in 3 months. I think it's really nice to be able to evolve it further. What we really like and what I think has helped a lot is this use of, for example, Figma as both a guideline and a library of elements, using automation, using AI to kind of help us scale. Because again, I'm really a big fan of this, and I say this all the time. Nowadays, you can't just think of branding as like creating a PDF, a guideline as the end result. Brands are moving. A lot more of our customers are looking into like self-generating brands nowadays. And how do we actually prepare for that future when every time you start a rebrand, maybe you're like 3 months in, there's now a new competition or something change, or like your biggest competitor bought another company, now rebranded, and now they're choosing the same color as you. Like there's just so many things happening so much quicker that we cannot allow ourselves to be stuck in like one way. So I will take a few minutes just to finish this off. So when we started thinking about our direction, we wanted to be AI first and we wanted to use AI for that. But we also wanted to show that it doesn't have to be that sort of boogeyman of this like six fingers and three legs. And for us, it just means like more, not less quality. It's just more opportunity. So first of all, we wanted to make sure that we are always grounded in this like realism, not in the fantasy world. And you saw this in the applications that we had before. There's a lot of this imagery is focused on nature. And we like this idea that like we're showing the world because we are based everywhere. We have colleagues that live by the sea and the mountain, like we're not bound by geography. And this is really interesting to us. But we said at the same time, what once we kind of created this as more like a mood board, that's not enough. We don't want to just have a bunch of like artificial people created with Midjourney. We wanted to really be able, first of all, to use our data to be on brand and to be a bit more scalable. So what we said is we're actually going to do a real photo shoot. So now you're like, I think this is always a bit more like nonsensical. Like you created all of this with AI, and now you're making a photo shoot and spending money to do it. But I will make sense in a second. So we basically took our mood board as inspiration and did a photo shoot in Cape Town where we have our video production team. And we spent 2 days filming a lot of really fun stuff. So we had actual supersiders as models, these really cool people that were kind enough to work with us. And we shot in this beautiful sort of like apartment style, like out of um, I don't know, like maybe half an hour from Cape Town. There was a sort of like work from home environment. We had people working on creative or lounging, like scenes that you would normally find like if you're working from home. And then we also had our mascot, the astronaut, on the beach. This is one of my favorite experiences in my life, actually. We had basically 2 hours at the end when we wanted to do the scene. And this looks kind of cool, but actually it was super windy. You literally couldn't stand. Like normally there was like dogs trying to play with the astronaut, like people passing by. And it was a bit crazy, but it was really fun and the result is really cool. So what we did now is we basically created our own, we're lucky enough to have an AI team with like creative technologists and developers. So it's not like I'm doing this thankfully, but they built a model that is trained on the photos that we created with the real people, and it lives in Figma. So if I open a plugin, I can say I want Monica, who's our model, to be sitting on the couch and blah, 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 right? Whatever I want. And this has been such a cool trick because we're now able to create anything we want, but again, using our own data and using our own brand colors. So like I can say green and it knows what green, right? It wouldn't just create random things. The lighting is consistent, the character is consistent. And these are just some examples of what we did. We were like, okay, we could literally create mock-ups um, for merch with this. We also are just building our latest campaign. And the whole toolkit, everything was done using this model, which is really exciting. Again, I think it's just such a fun way to work on this. And this doesn't mean that this is it and we're just going to do this forever. We're going to do other photo shoots, video shoots, right? But we're just going to use AI to kind of help us work with it in a more easy way. And these are just like some examples of the latest campaign. And I think a really nice example of what I was saying before, the brand does evolve. It doesn't all have to be always the same. And it does have, I think, a flexibility enough to be, different every time, but we are still using the same elements. So wanted to finish us off with a few learnings of this experience that I feel like are very similar to every other brand experience that I've had. So one thing, when in doubt, simplify. I find myself to be quite a like a perfectionist sometimes. I know a lot of creatives are. I know that a lot of times in the process of creating, you're just creating a lot of stuff. And at one point, we all have this feeling, especially if you're doing your portfolio or if you're doing your own rebrand, like complete overwhelmed. I'm blocked and I don't know where to go. Whenever I feel like I don't know where to go because I'm overwhelmed, I feel probably the result is the solution is not to do more stuff, is to do less. So almost like go back to the drawing board, like open another new file, empty file, take the three things you like and put them there. And like I think a lot of times it's not about creating more stuff. So simplifying is always the solution. Stand your ground as well. I think in every experience you will find people that are not happy with something. We had people in the team that were, for example, doubting your creative team's creative team. Like, what is that? Why is their creative team twice? Like if you don't get the pun, it can be difficult. And we could have said like, oh, let's try to find something else and come up with something that we're not happy with. But we were like, okay, let's go back. Let's think like, we're not going to accept no for an answer. We're going to find a way to explain this better. So actually me and a couple of people in the team literally spent 2 days just preparing a presentation with every single piece of like how we came up with this to explain it in like a more logical and statistical way. And we literally did a very quick poll with like 20 different creative leaders and asked them what they think. And then we had like a bit of a research thing we did as well. So just make sure that like you don't compromise on the things you really love. And then thirdly, I do think that stuff will happen that you don't expect, and you will have to accept that it's not going to be perfect. I think most of our day to day is not happening how we want. I think creative work is like that, especially if you work with clients, if you work with difficult people, things will happen all the time. You have to kind of accept it and be optimistic about the things you do because it will not stop happening. I think it's just a kind of matter of, uh, your mindset and kind of believing. I don't know why this thing is happening now. I wanted to do this, but no, I think it's all about really having an optimistic way of seeing things. When I was talking to Chris before this, like 5 minutes before this session, you said something really lovely that is sometimes it's enough for me to just wake up and think like it's another day and I'm alive, and that's amazing. And I don't think I want to focus on the fact that someone didn't like a small part of what I did. I want to focus on the fact that it's a great day and I'm working with the people I admire. So I think for us, it's also always like this. If you do a rebrand, it's probably going to last months and months, and it's really easy to be upset or frustrated by the process. It's all about that like optimism that will keep you going every day. And it's a marathon, not a sprint. So